Okay, well, good morning, everyone. Welcome to our webinar today, Healthy School Facilities, Planning for Good Repair in Local Control and Accountability Plans, or LCAPs, a primer for parents, school board members, community advocates, and others. I am Jeff Vincent with the Center for Cities and Schools at the University of California, Berkeley, and I'll serve as your host today. I want to thank everyone for joining us, and it looks like some folks are still joining as I speak. I want to thank my speakers, who I'll introduce in a second, and I also want to thank the California Endowment for their support in making this webinar happen. So I'm assuming everyone can hear me. I'm not getting anything in the chat function saying can't, so let me jump to first things first, which is logistics. So you should be hearing me now, and if you're not, you can either listen through the web audio or you can call in, so unmute your speakers or dial that number. And you'll see that on the bottom left-hand screen of the ReadyTalk screen is a chat function, and so we will be fielding comments and questions from you all and would love to hear from you. So please do that along the way, and I'll kind of collect them, and we may speak to them as each of us make our comments, but then we'll also kind of come back to them at the end when we have a more open discussion. But so feel free to put in questions as we go. Also, we will be archiving this for later viewing if you know folks that think might benefit from this. So we'll be putting that on our website, and I'll have the URL up on one of the last few slides for today. So our goals for today really are describe good repair in the local control funding formula context. What does that mean now? Describe how good repair is assessed. And then really, I hope we'll get into some discussion about best practices, strategies, ideas for local planning for good repair in the LCAPs, which pretty much most districts are kind of jumping right into as we speak, doing that work now. So let me go over the agenda and briefly introduce our speakers. As I said, I'm Jeff Vincent. First I want to make a few comments that I hope will set the table for the discussion. Why this is an important moment for school facilities planning in California. Clearly, we've had really big changes in the state's approach to education funding with the Local Control Funding Formula, or LCFF. And there are also big changes in funding for school facilities. And pretty much these two worlds of funding exist mostly wholly separate for the most part. But I think that the good repair aspect that is built into the Local Control Funding Formula law, I think, is an important, somewhat new connection between the conditions of facilities and educational outcomes. And clearly the conditions of facilities have implications for the environmental health of children, and of course staff, anyone who's on campus or in the building. And we know that health and health aspects are really closely tied to educational outcomes. So just a quick note about the Center for Cities and Schools. As I said, we're at the University of California, Berkeley. We are a policy research and technical assistance center at Berkeley, and we're focused on innovative approaches to positioning high-quality public education as essential for equitable, healthy, and sustainable communities. We focus a lot of our work on the relationship between the built environments and positive outcomes for children and youth. And in particular, we've spent a lot of time taking a look at this in regard to funding trends and policies around school facilities. That is, how do you have local and state policies and funding that really promotes healthy and educational superior school facilities and campuses. So following my comments, we'll hear from Bill Savidge, and Bill is the Assistant Executive Officer for the State Allocation Board, which oversees the state school construction funding. And Bill also spent many years working at West Contra Costa Unified School District in the Bay Area on their very large construction and renovation program, so he has a lot of experience. And I've asked Bill to give a deeper context of the establishment of the good repair standard and the development of the facility inspection tool that is used to assess good repair, and we'll talk about all that in a second. And I'm assuming everyone can hear me. I got a note on the chat function saying that audio was lost, but unless I hear something different, I'm going to assume that everyone can hear me. So following Bill, Okay, following Bill, someone says there's some sound problems. I hope only that's a very select few. I think people on the phone are having good, people on the phone are having really good luck listening, and most people say fine. Let me go back to this slide for just a second if folks want to dial in with their phone. I apologize if anyone's having a problem. It sounds like most people are having okay, well, I'm getting lots of chat things saying they can hear. Some people can hear fine. So anyway, if you're able to, please call in on this number, and I think you'll have no problems hearing. Otherwise, turn up your speakers and click the sound on your computer. You should be able to hear as well. So apologize for that break. So where was I? Following Bill, we'll hear from Joe Dixon. Joe is the Assistant Superintendent for Facilities and Government Relations for the Santa Ana Unified School District down south. Joe has been a longtime champion of school facilities planning. In particular, he's done a lot of great work on maintenance and modernization of existing schools. And Joe is currently also the chair of CASH, California's Coalition for Adequate School Housing. And I've asked Joe to walk us through how good repair is to be assessed under the law, and in particular with the facility inspection tool. And our goal here is really to kind of give folks a one-on-one 101 in terms of this is what good repair is, this is how the law says it has to be or it should be assessed, so that folks can more thoughtfully and meaningfully participate in local planning around good repair for the facilities, in particular under the LCAPs. Following the presentations by Bill and Joe, we'll get into more discussion. I've asked two people to kick off that discussion. The first is Kathleen Moore, who's Director of the School Facilities Planning and Transportation Division at the California Department of Education. And unfortunately, I got a note from her that she has a conflict that just popped up this morning and might not be able to make it. But if she does, hopefully she'll make some comments on her perspective from Sacramento in the California Department of Education on kind of school standards in school facilities and conditions in schools. And following Kathleen, I'm really pleased to welcome Brad Strong. Brad is the Senior Director of Education Policy for Children Now, and Children Now is a policy, research, and advocacy organization dedicated to promoting children's health and education in California. And Children Now has been heavily involved in LCFF policy development and implementation. So thank you all for joining us. And of course, we want to hear from you, and we want to engage with all of you in a discussion. So do submit your comments and questions in the chat function, and we'll field those. We've got over 100 folks registered, and a very diverse audience. Some people are, neck deep in facilities in their daily lives, and others really, are doing other work. And so we've tried to cater the discussion to fit everyone's kind of understanding of some of the issues going on. And so it's great to have such a diversity of folks. I wanted to point out quickly just a couple of references or important sources that folks will be referencing today. The first is the California Education Code, Section 17002. This is where the state defines good repair, and we'll talk about this in our presentations. We'll also refer to the Local Control and Accountability Plan, the LCAP template that the State Board of Ed has released. And I would direct you kind of all things LCFF to go to the West Ed site there in particular. And then lastly, the Facility Inspection Tool, or the FIT, is put out by the Office of Public School Construction, and you can find it there, or you could just search OPSC FIT, and I think it will come up pretty quickly on the Google. So as everyone's aware, the state of California has made a really big shift in the way it funds public education. The new local control funding formula increases funding and directs more resources to the state's highest need students. It also marks a shift to more local discretion for spending decisions, hence the name, Local Control Funding Formula. And within this expanded local freedom for spending decisions, the state has set up the new accountability structure, and namely that districts are required to develop these LCAPs, these local control and accountability plans. And in these LCAPs, the districts are supposed to establish annual goals for all students, describe what actions will be taken to achieve those goals, and detail how funds will be spent. And really the LCAPs serve as the guidance for the local implementation of the LCFF. And again, we're not going to get into all the details on LCFF here, but I would really encourage you to go to the WestEd website to get up to speed on that. But I would also encourage you, groups like Children Now, the ACLU, California Endowment in particular, have been producing some really great summaries and translations of the law that I think are really useful. And this graphic here is actually from the ACLU, which I have used repeatedly because it's just a really succinct set of information. So for the LCAPs, the State Board of Ed has identified 8 state priorities that at a minimum must be addressed by local districts in their plans. And you can see them listed in the green box in this ACLU summary. And I realize it's a little small to read, but the piece about facilities that we are talking about today is in state priority 1, and I've blown it up here. Number 1 is basic necessities, which includes 3 things: qualified and properly assigned teachers, sufficient instructional materials, and facilities in good repair. So these basic educational necessities are widely known as the Williams standards, and these come out of the 2004 legal settlement in Williams versus California that the Schwarzenegger administration settled. And Bill will talk a little bit more in detail about this in this context, but the Williams settlement really established the legal foundation for school facility condition in California. And standards on facilities in quote-unquote good repair were then codified in the Education Code, and I'll point to that in a moment. So the inclusion of good repair in the law on LCFF and in the state priorities for the LCAP that the State Board of Ed came up with, I think is an important shift on formalizing standards on conditions in existing schools. And this occurs within the context of pretty significant change happening in school facilities funding right now that some folks on the webinar may not be aware of. California has had a very robust state-local partnership for school facilities funding, particularly on construction, new construction, modernization, and renovation of existing schools, and a number of other categories. Since 1998, about $35 billion has been made available through statewide school construction bonds for K-12 facilities, and you can see that on the chart here. And local districts match these funds. And the state has also had a deferred maintenance program of about $3 billion in recent years that went out to all school districts, and school districts matched those monies. And on the screen, I've got a summary chart of state and local school facilities funds that we tallied in a report that we did looking statewide at school infrastructure a couple of years ago. And what we found is that a lot of money was spent over the last decade or so, since 1998, on school facilities. But moving forward, you can see these kind of big categories of funds. The 2 that I mentioned, deferred maintenance at the top, and then state bonds. Both of these programs that are circled there currently have no funding. And it's unclear going forward when and if there will be additional state funding for school facilities. So I think that this will undoubtedly put budget pressure on local districts for making needed investments to keep their buildings clean, safe, and functional, and of course in making important educational program delivery upgrades. So we know that many districts currently are reducing maintenance and custodial staff that has impacts on their buildings and accumulating backlogs of deferred maintenance. And both Bill and Joe will speak to this as well. So getting back to the LCAP, this makes, I think, that context of really changes in statewide school facilities funding, makes the inclusion of the good repair standard in the LCFF law really important to not overlook. And it seems that, this requirement has sort of, I would say, kind of flown under the radar in all the discussions, the broader discussions on the LCFF. But the LCAPs, must address the degree to which school facilities are maintained in good repair as specified in the Ed Code. So what does the Ed Code say on good repair? What I've done here is just pulled a few pieces of it just to give you a sense of it. But essentially what it does is it defines good repair. And good repair means that facilities maintained in a manner that ensures that it is clean, safe, and functional. And just to give you a sense of a couple pieces of it, Part A, gas systems and pipes appear and smell safe, functional, and free of leaks. B addresses mechanical systems, and part of that says they appear to supply adequate amount of air to all classrooms, workspaces, and facilities. L, interior and exterior drinking fountains are functional, accessible, and free of leaks. And then O, roofs, gutters, roof drains, and downspouts appear to be functioning properly and are free of visible damage and evidence of disrepair, etc. And that's not the whole thing. If you go to the Ed Code, it's 2 to 3 pages listings like that, but I wanted to give everyone kind of a sense of the way in which the language is written. And you can find that online very, very quickly. And both Bill and Joe will speak to this as well. So then remember that in the LCAPs, and districts have to address the state priorities, including the basic educational necessities, and what is laid out in the LCAP template is that districts need to set annual goals for each school and at the district level. So presumably facilities in good repair, keeping facilities in good repair would be part of that. They need to identify annual actions to reach these goals, including enumeration of any specific actions necessary for that year to correct any deficiencies with regard to the good repair standard. And then of course, making annual updates in that. So you can see that a big focus of this is, okay, how do you assess good repair? And I think that's what we'll talk about a lot in this discussion is this tool that has been created by the state a number of years ago called the Facility Inspection Tool, or the FIT. It's intended as a visual inspection tool where 15 facility components are evaluated. Additionally, the FIT includes a rating system to evaluate those components, and Joe will walk us through how that is used. So given that, I hope that sets the table for our discussion. And right now, I'd like to bring Bill Savidge of the State Allocation Board on to speak to us and really give us a more detailed discussion on kind of the backstory of the development of the FIT, because I think it really sets the context for the use of it locally. And then, before Joe will follow that and kind of walk us through it. So with that, Bill, would you step up?
Thank you, Jeff. Can you hear me?
I can hear you. I hope everyone else can.
I must be unmuted then. Good morning, everyone. This is Bill Savidge. I'm the Assistant Executive Officer for the State Allocation Board. I'm happy to be here. I did want to thank the Fresno County Office of Education for hosting me. Jeff Becker, the Director of Facilities here, graciously has put me up in a wonderful room with a phone and Wi-Fi. So just to get started, I want you to take a look at the building on the screen and ask yourself if a building that's in this kind of condition meets good repair standards. There's boarded up windows, but there's no broken glass. The entry is not accessible in terms of ADA compliance for anyone with disabilities. There's moss growing on the roof, and the downspouts dump right on the concrete, and there's an extremely sloppy paint job, including painting over all the windows and the doors. And yet, not clear to me whether this would be a set of deficiencies that would mean this building is not in good repair. And yet, it's pretty funky looking, and it's not clear that you'd want to have that be a part, the schools in those conditions be a part of where your kids are going. And I can share with you that this school was built in the 60s, never modernized, and is slated to be torn down. But I just want us to continue to focus upon good repair and the importance of good repair, but good repair as a minimum standard and how we can do better than that in California. So in order to do that, I think it's, as Jeff said, important for us to look at how the good repair standard was developed, et cetera. Next slide, Jeff. I don't seem to be in control. Thank you. And here's an outline of what I want to cover today. The background to the creation of the facilities inspection tool. I want to talk to you a little bit about some of the history of the not just the creation of the tool, but how it's gone in use in the field, what some of the successes are, and what some of the limitations have turned out to be from using the tool, and then talk a little bit, the best that I can, about how you could use it as part of your local control accountability plan, and some ways that you can incorporate it into the process. And then I want to talk a little bit, Jeff alluded to some of the funding changes that we face in California with the end of the deferred maintenance plan, deferred maintenance funding. And so what are we looking at here for school facilities maintenance in a non-set-aside era, non-categorical era? How can we maintain our buildings? What's the prognosis, and what are some of the issues? And actually, hopefully we can come back to some of that at the end when we're dialoguing a little bit about where we are in school facilities and where we think that local control funding formula will take us, and what some of the challenges and what some of the potential opportunities are for success in terms of facilities. Next slide, Jeff. So the Williams lawsuit, there's a brief summary at the bottom of this slide that gives you the basic dates and what was the case, if you will, against the state of California. Went on for many, many years until Governor Schwarzenegger took office and reached a settlement in 2004 with the plaintiffs. And what we're going to talk about is a number of the implementing pieces of legislation and follow-up legislation to that, which came out of the Williams settlement that established the good repair standard in California Education Code. Jeff's already referenced the Education Code there, so everybody should have their big, tall blue ed code out and have already, it's got it open, I'm sure, to make sure we're covering it. I think one of the things to remember about this settlement and about Williams is that it's really it's another in a long line of legal settlements that have shaped California education policy and California school facilities and education policy. Serrano, Williams, Godinez, and it's an interesting way to consider that we find ourselves in California many times shaping policy in response to legal settlements, in response to lawsuits, and that the frustration that is expressed in the plaintiffs bringing the lawsuits, that the legislature and the governor or the state agencies don't take the action that's needed, it's perceived by the plaintiffs, and then we end up getting policy that is dictated by lawsuit settlement. Whether it's a good thing or bad, I mean, it's been effective, it's worked, so something to think about as we go forward. The initial legislation that came out of Williams established the interim evaluation instrument, which is the precursor to the FIT. One of the things it also established was the emergency repair program, and that is a way that if schools have immediate health and safety deficiencies, they could have those funded through the settlement. $800 million was set aside, was not set aside, but was earmarked as an amount, and we'll talk a little bit about some of the things that happened to that over time. Next slide. So as I mentioned, and please, I'll try and make sure to cover every acronym that I can when it comes up. The IEI, Interim Evaluation Instrument, was set up by SB 550, which came immediately after the Williams settlement. And it was the first definition of the good repair standard and the first tool to assess good repair. And you can see the OPSC's IEI worksheet and the IEI tool that's on their website still if you want to take a look at it. Clean, safe, and functional. A facility maintained in a manner ensuring it to be clean, safe, and functional, and then pursuant to the IEI. So you use that as a tool, and this is the same context that you'll see in the same approach that's used for the FIT. So the IEI was in use immediately after the settlement in the first few years. And Jeff, why don't you take me to the next slide? So, I'm sorry, go back one. Yes. This is the interim evaluation instrument, one piece of it, down below from the electrical hazard section. And you'll see some of this stuff does get carried over into the FIT, but the IEI was, as I note there, it's sort of limited in its range because it's either yes or no. There's no gray, there's no this is good, that has a deficiency, it has an extreme deficiency, which is where the FIT ends up. And there's no overall site ranking and no way to get a sense of, well, if I took all of the data from the IEI, well, how could I rank this school? So you can see it was very limited. And the bullet points on the right side are, I think, important, and they're important to remember that they apply not only to the interim evaluation instrument, but eventually to the FIT. Who's required to use this? Okay, so first of all, actually every school district is required to use this, was required to use the IEI, and is required to use the FIT when completing the facilities section of the SARC. And I realize I did not define SARC for all of you that are not immersed in educational acronyms, and that is the School Accountability Report Card. And the SARC is the SARCs are sent up each year by school districts, and they're kept on the CDE website. But districts are required to use the inspection tool and confirm good repair as part of their SARC. Spoiler alert, it's clear that many districts don't do that, but we'll get back into that later. Also, districts that receive funding under the SFP, the School Facilities Program, or that used to receive deferred maintenance funds, are also required to confirm that they maintain their facilities in good repair. And finally, county offices. This is the use of the IEI and the FIT that I think are the most commonly seen in school districts in California, or that you may have heard about more, and that is where county offices of education have an oversight function for inspections of schools in the API, Academic Performance Index, decile 1 to 3 schools. Those are the lowest performing schools in California. County offices go out every year, perform a Williams inspection, quote unquote, as part of their oversight of those schools, and initially used the IEI and now use the FIT in order to perform that. So next slide, Jeff. So in 2006, so 2 years later, AB 607 Goldberg established the detailed good repair standards that we now find in Ed Code, and required OPSC, the Office of Public School Construction, to develop a permanent evaluation instrument for schools. And so that led OPSC to set up a working group on the FIT to develop the facilities inspection tool, including some of the people that you see listed in that bullet there. And the working group, which I was on, and I found it actually to be one of the most collaborative and successful working groups that I ever served on with a state agency. I felt that the agency really listened to what the stakeholders had to say, incorporated the results clearly, but there were some tensions, and I'm going to get to those in another slide, as there are in going back to the kind of fundamental tension here between good repair as a minimum standard for school facilities and the reality that districts and stakeholders want more, want better than good repair, want more than a minimum standard, and keep pushing the envelope to get that. So the working group developed the good repair standards for each of the 15 building and site categories, and Joe Dixon is going to get into each one of these in depth. And these were adopted by the State Allocation Board and are now essentially codified in the FIT. You can see one section, Jeff had another section, or a couple sections that he quoted. Notice the electrical section that I show in the box on the right side. Anything that's underlined with an X next to it signifies that if you have an extreme deficiency if the school has a power failure, that's an extreme deficiency, and you have to immediately correct that. Exposed electrical wires, properly covered and secured from pupil access, those are extreme deficiencies and need to be corrected. So that's a critical piece of this, the extreme deficiency. And I guess, and Joe can speak to this further, and maybe other people who've been involved in these, the extreme deficiency issue is critically important, and it also sets the background for potential funding under the Emergency Repair Program for extreme or immediate health and safety deficiencies. Next slide, Jeff. So I'm sure everybody has your reading glasses on, and you can see this. This is the score sheet, if you will, from the FIT. And what you can see, what this does is this summarizes all of the totals from the actual scoring page that Jeff showed you in his slide. You then roll them up onto this final score sheet, and you check under each of the systems. So under gas leaks, you put the number of good repair checks, the number of deficiencies, the number of extreme deficiencies. You total the percents, total the numbers of each categories. You divide them by the total of the number of areas, and then you get a percent of good and fair, and you get a ranking. So the importance of this is the ranking, because you determine an average percentage of the 8 categories above, which summarizes the 15 total categories, and then you do that to get a ranking. And you can see at the very bottom of the page, you can get exemplary at 99 to 100% of the good repair in all the categories. 90 to 99% is good, 75 to 89.9 is fair, and 0 to 75% is poor. And so this gives you an overall ranking for the school and gives you some targets. And if you've got deficiencies, then your maintenance staff has the ability to use this. And in fact, my experience in the district that I was at was that our maintenance staff went directly along with the Williams inspection team and took care of deficiencies that were noted immediately in many cases. And in most cases, they wanted to make sure that that was, that happened, and this tool was effective, the inspection process was effective in getting the district's maintenance staff out there to do it. But just when I say that, it brings up one of the shortcomings with this tool, and I'll get to that in a second. But Jeff, why don't you shift to the next slide, please? Thank you. So, during the process of implementing the FIT, there were, as I said, a number of tensions among the working group. And I'm giving you this background again because I think it's important. The tensions are still here, and they're things that are important for those of us that care about school facilities to recognize and to find ways to work with. And I think they're also important for, if there seem to be a lot of people who were on the webinar who are from the health policy group and the health groups, and it's important for the health groups to understand the milieu of school districts. I think it's somewhat opaque many times when you look from the outside in, trying to understand districts, trying to understand where facilities fit, where custodial services fit, where environmental health concerns fit. So this is, I'm trying to give you some of the background of where that happens. The plaintiffs who were part of the process obviously wanted to hold everybody's feet to the fire. School districts, the county offices, OPSC, everyone. For school districts, and I was at the time at a school district, and I was representing the Coalition for Adequate School Housing at that time. It was a past chair. I think I was the vice chair at that time. There was a lot of concern on the part of school districts about how districts were going to be perceived by these rankings. And I think coupled with that, districts were concerned that they were going to get slammed, if you will, in shorthand, and not have any money to be able to address the concerns. Now, we know that there was emergency repair program funding at the time. How that would play out, I think, is going to be instructive, and I'll get into that in a second. But districts were also always pushing the envelope, saying, well, wait a minute, if you've got a good repair standard that says no, no exposed wires, isn't that a code violation also? Code issues kept creeping into the discussion. Hey, wait a minute, isn't a good repair violation? Well, so think about the mechanical system one. If you go back and you look at your your good repair standard for mechanical systems, well, it says you're getting adequate air. But there are code standards under the Uniform Mechanical Code or the International Mechanical Code now that have specific requirements for the number of air changes for a classroom. Are those being met? And can we have that be a part of a good repair standard? And basically we got the pushback from the state. No, we're not here to enforce the code, and we're not going to do that. What we're going to do is do what we've been directed to do within the legislation. We want accountability, but we have to stay within the limits of good repair as they've been defined in the legislation. And the state also was clear, because districts kept pushing to say, wait a minute, don't we need to modernize this school? Where's the modernization that should have been able to fix this? And the state said, no, we're not here to talk about modernization. We're here not to talk about broader facilities issues, but to focus on developing a tool for good repair. And I think the state, implicit in where the state's position was that deferred maintenance and routine restricted maintenance requirements were sufficient for school districts. And if everybody's not familiar with the routine restricted maintenance requirements, these are related to school districts that participate in the school facilities construction or modernization program are required to set aside a percent of their general fund revenues into a routine restricted maintenance fund account in order to maintain the facilities that they receive funding for under the school facilities program. And so just keep that in mind, and we'll talk about that a little bit further as we talk about funding going forward. Next slide, Jeff. Thank you. So how has it been? How has the FIT worked? We've had I think some real successes with the FIT. First of all, with the ability of the FIT to rank schools and to rate them, it puts deficiencies in an overall context that I think has been extremely helpful for school districts and has been able to assist them as a tool to be able to make some progress in meeting good repair standards. The system is very simple, it's easy to use, and the reports now with the FIT more accurately characterize the conditions of the school sites. And I think everybody's used to it. I mean, they understand it, they know how to use it, they know how to respond to it, so it's been very, very helpful for school districts, I think, and county offices, although hopefully we'll get some comments from county offices and school districts about what they think. And there is some evidence, limited evidence, but there is some evidence of improved facilities conditions in the API decile 1 through 3 schools that we think can be directly related to the use of the good repair standard and the FIT. What are the limitations? I think a really fundamental limitation is that this is a snapshot in time. Okay, this is a once a year inspection. What happens on the other 364 days a year at that school site? Are the restrooms locked up again? This happens, believe me, and I'm sure you all know this, but I think that's a big concern. So how do you deal with that? And as I had said before, there has been limited use of the FIT, I think, in some districts on their SARCs. I think that some districts do it, not everybody does it to the extent that I think was envisioned, so there's some limitations there for your non-decile 1 through 3 schools in the way the tool has been used or not used, let's say. I guess the fundamental limitation on the FIT is the one that I've made allusions to all the way along. These are extremely basic good repair standards, okay? And they don't address critical modernization needs at the site, and they don't address educational adequacy at the school sites. And so, if your school can only meet good repair standards and nothing else, I'm not sure that it's really creating an adequate educational environment. So that's a fundamental concern that I think many people in school districts who have, and so we can talk about that further as we go along. Finally, the emergency repair program, which was a part of this whole system, an integral part of the system, when you identified immediate health and safety needs, when you identified extreme deficiencies that were immediate health and safety threats, you could get funding under the ERP. But the problem is the emergency repair program was never fully funded. The program was set aside said there would be up to $800 million from the Prop 98 reversion account, and spoiler alert, guess what? There hasn't been any money coming back into that account. And right now, there's over $450 million in applications waiting for funding under the emergency repair program at OPSC. Now, the governor's budget for this year proposes, I believe, $188 million in funding from the ERP funds to be taken out of the general fund this year. So this is still going through the legislative process. So more funding will be occurring to be able to take some of those backlog projects on the ERP. But remember, these are immediate health and safety projects, $450 million worth, that were identified in some cases 5 and 6 years ago that are sitting on an unfunded list at OPSC. So raises some interesting questions there. Next slide, please. Thanks, Jeff. So I want to end up with some discussions about how you can use, how I see the utility of the FIT in the context of where we are in the Local Control Accountability Plans, LCFF. It can be, I think, a useful tool. Good repair is very clearly defined. If you're a stakeholder at a school district or a parent at a school district or someone who's involved in the process, you can certainly use the good repair standard and the FIT as a tool to hold people's feet to the fire and say, yeah, this is what we have as our standard and we want to use this. The staff are used to it. District staff are used to it. And they're used to the process. They're used to the rankings. And deficiencies can be clearly identified. So, for example, in terms of the LCAP process, if you have goals in your plan to maintain good repair, which you must have, and you can then set aside specific actions to reach those goals. For example, you can say, we will have as a specific action that we correct any identified good repair deficiencies as part of our LCAP, and then we will identify needed maintenance funding in our budget in order to identify good repair deficiencies. So I think, again, this is a very, very minimum standard for good repair. How does a local community establish a good repair standard that goes beyond this? So for example, should your district consider a more enhanced good repair standard that includes educational adequacy, that includes technology, or that in more specific ways related to mechanical systems might include that we have every school that needs it, that's in a climate zone that needs it, have functioning air conditioning. You just use that as one way that you could be more specific, I think. And going back up to some of your specific actions to reach goal, or a goal in your plan. What if a good repair goal in your plan went beyond the FIT, but said, how can we meet good repair we'll do it by addressing everything that's on our old our previous deferred maintenance plan. So I think there's some ways that you can go beyond just the very basics of good repair. Next slide. So I want to end up by talking a little bit about maintenance in the non-set-aside era. So remember that part of the issue here is that we have come out of an extreme recession where districts had budgetary flexibility, which has severely impacted district maintenance spending. The Legislative Analyst's Office did a report in 2012 on a 3-year look at school finance, where they had a study that showed that 48% of districts shifted all or a substantial portion of their funding away from deferred maintenance when districts were granted program flexibility. I can tell you anecdotally just my remembrances of multiple board meetings, school board meetings in a row where we talked about reducing custodial services, okay? Custodial services are the front line of environmental health in school districts. And we talked about reducing classroom cleaning from every day to every other day, from taking school sites from 2 custodians down to 1 custodian, and the workload that they would have to do in order to maintain basic standards. So we've come out of a real difficult era, a non-set-aside era for maintenance and custodial. So it's important, I think, that the LCAP focus on good repair as one of the 3 basic necessities. It may be critical for us to actually restoring a sensible level of maintenance funding to school districts and a proper level. And I think it would be ironic and wonderful that the most flexible system that we've ever had under the local control funding formula might result in greater investment in school facilities in California. Next slide, please. And I do also want to remember that there are many, many people, and specifically focus on my members of the State Allocation Board, that are extremely concerned about the lack of maintenance in California school facilities. And the State Allocation Board's Program Review Subcommittee last year recommended, and the board accepted the recommendations, that we reinstitute routine restricted maintenance requirements for any district receiving state bond funds, because our board members are concerned that if we spend billions of dollars to build schools and we're not maintaining them correctly, and it's just a vicious cycle where then those needs get deferred to capital needs. And so my bottom bullets are really about that, because remember, the school districts are sitting on, and I don't mean that in a bad way, sitting on, they have access to currently over $30 billion in local bond funds that have been voter authorized but are now unissued. And will they be using those bond funds essentially to replace or supplant maintenance funding? And is this funding really, the bond funding that's out there, is that really the critical capital and renewal funding that we need to be making in the state? And that's the local money that's ready to go. Next slide, Jeff. Thank you. And I'll wrap it up here. Sorry to take so long. So just in summary, tried to take you through a history of defining good repair, because I think it does inform the discussions we're having as we develop local control accountability plans. Tools such as the FIT are important to help districts meet good repair standards, identifying deficiencies, but continue to remember the limitations in the FIT and the need to go beyond good repair, because we want to ensure excellence in school facilities, not minimum standards. And those things, those tools to do that are some of the ones in the bottom bullet: condition assessments and condition indexes, master planning, ed specs, planned maintenance, and best practices for maintenance to give us the kind of facilities that we want for 21st century learning. Thank you.
Wow, thanks so much, Bill. That was great. And I think you raised some really good questions. And a number of folks have submitted questions, but I think I'll get back to those. But I'd like to move now and invite Joe Dixon to give us some info on how do you actually do this at a local level. Joe comes from Santa Ana Unified School District, and he's been working on these issues.
Thanks, Jeff.
So, Joe, go ahead.
Well, thank you, and I hope everybody can hear me. If somebody could write in and say they can, that would be good. First off, like Bill, I want to thank the County Office of Education, too, because the presentation that I'm doing is really something that they developed and they use, and they use it to train school districts on the facility inspection tool and good practices. So thank them, and specifically the Orange County Department of Ed. I think I can do the slide. Let me see. Yes. So this is all about facilities, although as Bill and Jeff pointed out, there's other components to the Williams settlement. But since we're talking about facilities, that's what I'm going to talk about. And the most important thing to remember, and it's like the third time we've said it here, it's good repair as defined in the Ed Code. Clean, safe, and functional. And Bill's right. This is a snapshot. This is a snapshot of your facilities one time a year, but there's other opportunities for people who may see things that are deficient, and those opportunities are quarterly. You have to go to your school board and have a public hearing on any deficiencies so that it's brought public, and then annually that's required as well, and it's reported to your county offices of education. And even though we talk about decile 1, 2, and 3 schools is probably more prominent here, every school is considered a Williams school. I've heard around the state, well, that's not a Williams school. Every school should be inspected with a facility inspection tool or something equal or greater. So when you're going through, when you're using the FIT tool, the facility inspection tool, you have to keep these things in mind, because it's a snapshot of your cleaning and your maintenance of the facility. And is it clean, and is it safe, and is it functional? So let's get into the 15 categories. The first category is gas leak. Now, gas is really easy to detect because the gas company puts a lot of stink, we'll say, into the gas, so you can tell if there's a gas leak. One of the things, and a gas leak is an extreme deficiency, and that means get the heck out of the building and get that thing fixed quick. One of the things that we see a lot are pilot lights in kitchens and home economic areas and things like that, water heaters. If they have the pilot light not on, you'll smell gas, so that's something to check all the time. In laboratories, science labs, there has to be a distribution valve that's controlled by the teacher, and it should be in a locked enclosure. So if you're looking at your school, you should always look for that. Then the teacher has control, because we all know kids like to play around with those kinds of things, and that can create a hazardous condition. So the teacher has to have control over the whole lab in a locked area. HVAC, air conditioning, Bill alluded to some of the codes. Whenever the room's occupied, it has to be on. There has to be ventilation. It could be open windows if there's no HVAC system, but whenever the building's occupied, it has to be on. Bill talked about air exchanges. It should be turned on probably somewhere about a half an hour before the room gets occupied, so you get at least one air exchange in there. One of the things that's pretty interesting, and I've been through it in my career, is the CO2 level, the carbon dioxide level, and there's a range that it's supposed to be. Well, there's parts of our state where the ambient CO2 level exceeds the acceptable amount of carbon dioxide even in a classroom. So the introduction of outside air, which is supposed to be by ASHRAE standards 15 cubic feet a minute, I believe it is, per occupant, sometimes you have to weigh those kind of things. But the bottom line is the ventilation has to be on whenever the room is occupied. And it has to be comfortable, a comfortable temperature. And I think we can all define that a little bit differently, but I think some kind of reasonable expectation of a comfortable temperature would be normal. Bill's example of that school in the beginning would be a deficiency because the windows were boarded up. You can't have boarded up windows. That is a deficiency. Broken glass, of course, is dangerous. One of the things about fences that I've seen a lot, and I've talked to a lot of people about, is if it's a chain link fence and the top and the bottom where the chain link ends is barbed, that's it's not in our fit, but that's a safety hazard because kids, adults, all of us, we stand up against chain link fences to watch maybe a sporting event or whatever it might be. Those things are sharp and they're dangerous and they can cut you. So it should be looped. A chain link fence should be looped on the top and at the bottom so it's not barbed, twisted together, and typically has two barbs on the end. Gates, if you're doing an inspection, open the gate and close the gate. Make sure that functions correctly. That's unfortunately a somewhat common deficiency. Interior surfaces, I think, are really probably the most obvious to spot. If you have mold or mildew, of course, that's a deficiency. Ceiling tiles. Your ceiling tiles should all be in place with no holes and no discoloration. And carpet, oftentimes we'll see some ripples, but we say excessive ripples or tears. That would be a deficiency as well. And floor tiles, of course, should all be in place. So when you're doing these inspections, you're walking into every room in the school. Hazardous materials, typically you'll find it at high schools, but other schools could have hazardous materials as well. They have to be stored in an appropriate, if it's a flammable chemical, for example, it has to be stored in a locker designed for flammable materials, and they're clearly marked, and they have to be locked at all times too. We talk about paint and peeling paint. Schools that were built before 1980 could and probably do have lead paint. So obviously that's dangerous, and you have to make sure that paint's not peeling. So you look at that, and really, as I say, pay attention to those schools built before 1980. Structural damage, and that's really come into focus here recently in Orange County with the earthquakes we've been having, and there have been a couple of schools affected. Although schools built to the Field Act are, after hospitals, the safest buildings to be in California. Some earthquakes can be pretty powerful, as we know, and there's been a couple of schools affected here. So. Even without the earthquake stuff, you check for the structural damage, and that means walking around looking for cracks, columns and pillars and those kinds of things. If you see cracks in it, that could be an extreme deficiency. If they're leaning at all, of course, that would be as well. Floors in classrooms, it can be hard to see because there'll be stuff in the classroom, but if you're looking for that, that's an extreme deficiency as well. All of these that are underlined, and Bill pointed that out on his, it's in the fit. If it's underlined, it's an extreme deficiency, which means you have to correct it immediately. Fire safety. Exits being obstructed happens more often than we like to talk about. Egress, you can never be locked in a building. I think we all know that. And also now gates on the outside. We have panic hardware on those too. It's pretty common for schools to padlock those Well, you can't. You can't. They shouldn't be padlocked. So the basic rule of not being locked into a building, have an open, easy way out is essential. Fire sprinklers, it could be difficult to tell if they work by just walking through, but they should be tested annually. Fire extinguishers have to be serviced every year. And emergency alarms, again, it's pretty hard to tell when school's in session if you're running them, but schools are supposed to test all of their emergency alarms on a regular basis. Bill talked about exposed electrical wires, power failures. You know, if outlets, a switch plate is broken, that's a deficiency. Adequate lighting, there's standards on that, and I guess the easiest way to tell if your lighting is adequate is it working? Are all the bulbs in, and is it working? Because it should be designed to have enough foot candles in that classroom to allow the education to take place. So if it's not, I think that one's pretty obvious. Lights flickering is easy to understand as well. Schools are a great place to live if you're a pest or a vermin, as we have it listed here, because there's three things they need, of course: food, water, and shelter. And shelter and water are everywhere and simple in a school. It's the food part. Whenever you see a food being eaten in inappropriate areas, you get insect infestations very easily, but also, rat and mice populations and things like that too, because they can set up a nest and go in a 50-foot circle around that nest. So it may not be Joe and Bill's classroom that has the food, but if it's Jeff's classroom and it's within that range, they could live in my room and go over to Jeff's room to eat. Anyway, that's a major deficiency. Holes in walls, ceilings, and floors are pretty obvious. One of the best ways to keep them out, besides breaking that triangle, one of the legs of that triangle, is to keep your envelope sealed up so they can't get in. Drinking fountains, one of the things we see a lot with drinking fountains is pressure, not having adequate pressure. So you have to make sure that they work correctly. Sometimes in the older schools especially, the piping creates a situation where the water's discolored or it tastes a little funny, so that's a deficiency as well. Restrooms, probably the biggest deal I would say we have with the fit. They have to be clean. They have to be stocked with paper. They have to be open. Now the fit does talk about restroom when kids are in class that you can close up some of your restrooms, and the intent there was to allow for cleaning or stocking of supplies while the kids were in. But when the kids are out, the recess or in passing periods, every restroom has to be open. And it has to be clean. It has to be functioning. You have to have soap, and you have to have water, and you have to have towels or some way to dry your hands. Sewer system, I think that one's pretty obvious, and you can see around drains, if there has been a problem in the past, it's usually stained. So if it is and you're doing an inspection, you want to ask some questions about that. And sewer odor, a lot of times it can be just the trap, but that would be a deficiency as well. Roofs, of course, you're looking at Bill, the building that he put up there, and you're looking at the roof with the water coming over the downspout, or the somehow there's no gutter there. That would be a deficiency. It's hard to look at roofs. That's really difficult for for people doing the fit unless they're, a maintenance or facility professional, because you have to get, most of our roofs are flat, and you have to get up and inspect them. But of course, if they do leak, you're going to see ceiling tiles that are damaged or other evidence of water, maybe down the walls on the inside or the outside. Playgrounds, with the budget crisis most districts have had in the last 6-7 years, things like asphalt has been neglected, and you start neglecting that creates a lot of hazards as well. So you want to check the playground areas really well, and especially the transition from a paved area onto a turf area. That seems to be one of the areas of most concern, even if you're not seeing a lot of cracks or holes in the asphalt or concrete or whatever that surface might be. So you want to check that out. Playground equipment, I would recommend that every district have an annual certified playground inspector check your playground equipment. It can be one of the most dangerous, if you will, areas for kids just by its nature. So have that checked out. And then overall cleanliness. You can have an old school, and you can have a school that may be in need of modernization, but if it's clean, now that shows a lot of pride. And you can see just walking around the school if there's trash and if there's graffiti, those are all deficiencies, and I think that one's pretty easy to see. So it's the extreme deficiencies that were all underlined there. There's a lot of best practices that we didn't talk about here today with school maintenance, but they're in the FIT guideline book, and you can download that from the CASH website. It's CASH. cashnet.org, www.cashnet.org, and the CDE website has it as well. And so I would encourage you to do that, because again, there's a lot of best practices in there that we didn't have time to talk about today. So again, these are the samples of extreme deficiencies, and we went over those today. And I just encourage you to download the FIT and take a look at it. If you have a concern about your school and you're not involved in doing the inspection at all, or you have questions, it's really a good resource for you to use. And with that, that's it for me. Thank you.
Great, thanks so much, Joe. Lots of good detail on using this tool. So at this point, let me turn to the discussion, and we'll field some questions from you all listening in. But I'd like to invite Brad Strong from Children Now to comment from his perspective, doing work on education and childhood health promotion in particular, and of course their involvement in local control funding formula, both policy and on the implementation side. Brad, are you there?
I am. Thanks, Jeff. And thank you all for joining. So Children Now, we've been intimately involved in the promotion and passage and now the implementation of local control funding formula. And I was asked to kind of help connect the dots as they relate to the LCFF, or the local control funding formula. That established, when it passed the legislature, they established 8 state priorities. And it requires local educational agencies to engage the stakeholders in identifying needs, establishing goals and specific actions, and ultimately aligning those goals, actions, goals and actions with the resources in their budget. First, I want to say that I think districts have been doing a fantastic job of engaging parents and community. There's been thousands of forums and meetings that have occurred throughout the state. That said, I do think it's been meaningful efforts, but I also think that there's a much higher level of engagement that can occur. And in our experience, most of the forums and the meetings, they help to educate the stakeholders, and they ask for input. But what we see is that they seem to be missing a little bit in terms of the conversation about the data, the original starting point of a needs-based analysis to get a better picture of the 8 state priorities, and to really have those deep data conversations to help identify the gaps and needs as part of that conversation. I think so. Too many, I think, are simply starting the conversation with a simple question. What do students, English learners, foster youth, low-income students need? And the feedback sometimes comes out as a wish list or meaningful issues, but it's not really the starting point doesn't begin with the looking at all of the 8 state priorities and each of the issues. So no deep conversation about suspension expulsion rates, and I'm not this is broadly stated. So I'm sure there's communities that are doing this fabulously, and I think that the engagement is definitely there. I really think districts are doing a good job of having the community forums and the opportunity for input. And I think this will develop over time. And so in the years ahead, when we start to really do what's the data say as a starting point, and then to begin to look back and forward as to how to establish those goals, actions, and priorities. I think second, the local control funding formula requires that each district is to develop a local control accountability plan, or an LCAP. As I mentioned, there are 8 state priorities, and among the 8 state priorities that must be addressed in all local control accountability plans, the very first one highlights the Williams settlement and facilities in particular, and it reads that basically the priority 1 is the degree to which the teachers of the district are appropriately assigned and fully credentialed. Every pupil in the school district has sufficient access to the standards-aligned instructional materials. And then lastly, and school facilities are maintained in good repair as specified in subdivision D of section 17,002. And I think that's the really important, are maintained in good repair as specified in, and specifically said in subdivision D of section 17,000.2. So it's important because it's the references to the facilities inspection tool that we've been discussing, and so it's clear that must be part of the state priorities. If you're a facility leader, a school board member, parent, community member, obviously you need to make sure that this is being done, and that you've really assessed the conditions of the gas and mechanical, electrical systems, doors, windows, fences, and interior systems, the lighting, drinking fountains, bathrooms, playgrounds, etc., all that was described. And that is, and it's very important that the facility, that this is a meaningful part of that LCFF discussion, and in your local, and included into your local control accountability plan. I think that's, the point I'm trying to make is, when you do the needs analysis and you have the conversations with the community, sense that you're really elevating and highlighting, a starting point with all of the data needs. The facility inspection tool is a good starting point on facilities. When you look at the other 8 state priorities, in particular school climate and student engagement, addresses issues of chronic absenteeism. Are you looking at your chronic absenteeism rates, and are you looking at your suspension and expulsion rates and the disparities to start to identify what your goals and actions are going to be? But on the facility front, you need to make sure that really is input into this is input into that development process in the conversation with the community. Finally, as Jeff and Bill said, the facility inspection tool monitors the minimum standards. These really are minimum, but I think nothing, what should be made also clear is that nothing precludes you from including other facilities priorities to support the health, education, and well-being of children in these conversations. What about your kitchen needs, freshwater stations, physical education? How should those be addressed? What are the standards that you want to set up in your district and with your community? All are certainly worthy of conversation and should be part of that facilities conversation control accountability plan. Last, I do want to note is, when it gets all down to the dollars, I think it's really important. There's a note of caution here that which dollars you choose to use for all of these basic facilities needs does matter. I think that all that we've discussed are really basic needs for all students, basic facilities for all students, and so it might be a bit controversial, but I'm going to suggest that these are base dollars. These are the dollars that are really applicable to, should be used to make sure that all facilities and all schools are meeting these expectations, and that you need to be really extremely cautious when considering using any supplemental or concentration dollars for such basic needs.
There you go.
Great. Thanks, Brad.
Good point.
That's super helpful. So we've got about 10 minutes left. Let me turn to some of the questions that folks have been putting in, and I'll try to kind of condense some of them together because a lot of them are the same, and a lot of them actually pick up on Brad's comment about, why isn't such and such included, or why isn't this included or that included, and I'll touch on some of those in a minute. And I think Brad's point too about nothing precludes a district from going kind of above and beyond what's in the good repair, and I think most of us, we all kind of made that point. And I wonder if there's a couple of questions about, how is planning for LCAP rolling out in local districts, specifically as connected to the FIT or facilities planning. And Joe, I wonder if you would kind of comment on that in terms of kind of what's the process you are currently doing at Santa Ana, kind of how you see that going, and pepper that with your recommendations for others. Because I think, and maybe Brad or Bill can speak to this as well, is, arguably facilities, getting into all this stuff isn't that sexy, right? How do you, get parents to be engaged and involved in it? So Joe, I don't know if you'd be willing to kind
sure. And Santa Ana, I think our unduplicated count is 94%. It's really high. So our supplemental and concentration grants are very, very high. So our LCAP, which is designed for those students, and the money, as we all know, for LCFF, and is designed for kids now, which is really, really good. So our superintendent has set up 44 different community meetings, nights, weekends, to get parental input. We met with all the stakeholders besides parents and community members, internally. And on the facility side, we've designed a 3-year maintenance plan to address many of the things, the conditions. We've actually done an inventory of our equipment and systems, so we know where we're at with it. And I will say, going backwards, even though the state has made routine restricted maintenance of 3% optional and deferred maintenance non-existent for the most part, or optional really, but non-existent for most, we fully funded it here in Santa Ana, and we also had a local bond that helped us take care of a lot of things too. So we've been fortunate. But going forward, to answer your question, we've come up with a 3-year plan for taking care of the facilities.
Thanks, Joe. assuming Bill or Brad don't want to jump in on that, I think there's some other questions. A number of people have asked about what's the relationship between fit as a measure of basic condition and the move towards the more widespread use of more performance-based criteria such as CHIPS or others, that is performance-based around energy and environmental criteria. Because they seem to be, a number of questions raised about, they seem to be disconnected, and there's not a lot of inclusion of those things in the fit. Is that the case?
Yes, they are disconnected. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, it's a really good question, and I think that it goes back to what I was trying to talk about the tensions here between the minimum good repair standards and the fit as a tool, and the kind of high-performance school standards that are embodied in LEED and CHIPS that we have, that many districts are doing and are implementing as part of their modernization programs or their new construction programs. And I don't know how you, I don't know how you get there. It's been a difficult road for the state of California. I'm not sure if you're aware, but we have $35 million in high-performance school funding to build CHIPS schools, to build high-quality, high-performance environments that is basically stranded and has never been accessed for a whole number of reasons. But yeah, finding a way that you can introduce those kinds of standards at the local level as part of what is good repair, as part of your planning process I think would be critical as part of doing this if you can get there. But they're very the fit is so disconnected from those standards. It's just unbelievable.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Bill. A broad question is, someone asked, what is the process for stakeholders to make recommendations to improve the fit? And then a number of people asked about specific specific things to improve, such as, they're surprised that the fit doesn't, or something related to the fit doesn't measure anything about educational adequacy of the building, as I think, Bill, you mentioned. And a question about, for example, if a school was designed for 500 students, but it actually happens to enroll 750 right now, does that even come up on the fit?
No. I mean, short answer to that. I think maybe Brad could come in on this too. The question of whether, I think the fit per se is maybe not, it's not really that there's any process to make changes to it, but I think the process is probably going to focus back on the LCFF LCAP process, as we go through this and have results or not, or we have issues that arise out of it where, say, for example, the facility standards don't seem to be adequate or whatever, is the legislature going to engage in a process of wanting more accountability and different standards? And I think we actually saw that yesterday in the legislature where for a different part of the LCFF funding, legislators are already demanding that they want more accountability and changes, and I think they were cautioned at a couple of different points by people saying, hey, this is all brand new. Let's see how this happens, how it rolls out, where we need to do this. We're in the midst of our first year of getting there, that maybe we need to let this happen first and see what the changes are that need to happen. Brad, do you have a comment on that?
Yeah, I think currently the local control accountability plan and the state priorities, it sets the fit as the minimum expectation. Locally, I think districts and communities can choose higher levels and work through their plan with their own priorities, and I think the legislature will be monitoring to see to the extent that is the local control and are these provisions meeting their minimum expectations, or will they come back? I think the other thing I do want to answer a couple questions here, both from Carrie and Jesse, that are asking about the dollars that can be used. And this is worthy of webinars, multiple webinars in and of themselves. And Children Now has done several. I know Ed Trust has done some. The School Services of California is a good source for district folks to get input on how these dollars are to be spent. But the local control funding formula, we didn't really touch on this, but it breaks down funding into three pots really: the base funding, supplemental funding, and concentration funding. Both supplemental and concentration dollars are really based on student counts of English learner, foster youth, and economically disadvantaged youth. And specifically, the language says that the dollars for supplemental and concentration must be used to increase or improve services for the unduplicated student populations. And so the question, and I think that the regs are looser than many have desired, and as loose as some have desired. And for that, I'm saying that it's gray in terms of if I'm giving guidance, you do not use base level funding. I mean, you only use base level funding, not concentration and supplemental dollars for your basic facilities maintenance and conditions. And those are really the dollars, and that you really should use supplemental and concentration to be above and beyond to increase and improve for the students targeted.
I wanted to jump in real quick for everybody. Santa Ana again has about a 94% unduplicated count of those three areas that Brad just said. So we have significant supplemental and concentration grants, and that money is designed to follow those kids in the targeted area. There's a lot of districts, of course, that don't have that, and right here in Orange County, there's several right around us that don't get that kind of funding either. But one of the things in the LCFF is class size reduction, and that's reducing a lot of school districts raise class sizes during this economic downturn significantly, and we got rid of 20 to 1 in most districts, if not all. Well, I guess it'd just be most, and we're over 30 to 1, and now we have to reduce to 24. That by itself is over 150 teachers for Santa Ana, which equals probably around $15 million of that money just for class size reduction. But the challenge is going to be the facilities. You get into urban districts like ours, and we've been removing portables, significant amount of portables, and we certainly don't want to put portables back on, and Bill can talk about how the state feels about portables too. So it's very challenging to meet a lot of this, the goals, if you will, of LCFF.
Right. Thanks, Joe. And I want to address one more question before we sign off. Is that a clarification question? Someone asked if the state does not require certification by a licensed A&E professional for the FIT. That's correct, right?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, great. Well, we're at the top of the hour, and here on the West Coast it is lunchtime, and I want to respect everyone's time. I want to thank all of my speakers for this great information. We could keep going, and I hope this has given you a broad overview of what's going on and helped you in all your local work related to LCAP in particular. We will be archiving this webinar and pointing to other resources relative to this on our website at citiesandschools.berkeley.edu. I don't have my email on there, but if you go to the website, you can find my email. Jeff Vincent is my name. Feel free to email me any specific questions you have, and I can try to point you in the right direction. And with that, I will also thank all of you for joining. Thank you for your great questions. Thank you to the California Endowment for supporting a lot of folks' work on issues related to environmental health and school facilities and student performance. So have a great day, everyone, and thanks a lot.
Thanks, Jeff.
Thank you. Please stand by.